Welcome into the Denver Sports Podcast, brought to you by our great friends over at Breckenridge Brewery. I am your host for today, Jesse Montano, joined by my great friend AJ Hafley of DNVR Avalanche. AJ, we're starting this pod off with a big disclaimer. We are doing this this show on some of the biggest trades in Denver sports history, and going back through, there have been some doozies, primarily from two of the four major sports teams. But there's been some significant trades throughout the last 30, 40 years here in Denver, and we want to talk about those, some relative to the Avs, some very recent ones with the Denver Broncos. But it must be mentioned, you and I are both off of our DNVR Avalanche beat. The NHL trade deadline is now 3 days away, and the Avs are in on one of the top targets in the league, at least still. And you and I are kind of all over our phones right now. So there's a small chance that part of the way through this podcast, it has to transition to a DNVR Avalanche emergency pod if they were to right now kind of fulfill their role as underdog and come through and up the ante and pull Claude Giroux out of Philly. Don't know if that's going to happen. Looking less and less likely.
Seems unlikely. So we'll cross that bridge if we get to it.
Yeah, but just wanted to throw that out there. Part of the reason why I was asking around a few people yesterday to jump on the show with us, and there was some scheduling conflicts and stuff. I said, you know what? Maybe it's best if it's just AJ and I, just on the off chance something happens and we've got to bail out of here. But first, AJ, we did put it out on Twitter. Before we get into some of these past trades, again, the Avalanche are a cup contender this year. It's been known for a while they're trying to make a big splash at the deadline. Claude Giroux, captain of the Philadelphia Flyers, future Hall of Famer, has pretty much everything on his resume but a Stanley Cup.
Is he a future Hall of Famer?
I think so. I think especially if he wins a cup. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not a first ballot, but I think he gets there. The Avs have been in on this for a while. What's the latest? Everyone was kind of waiting for Claude Giroux to play his 1,000th game in Philly. That happened last night. Very emotional night. Flyers pulled out all the stops for him. It was really more of a farewell game than it was a 1,000th game celebration.
Yeah.
What's the latest on Claude Giroux, and how is it pertaining to the Avalanche?
Oh, well, right now it's Giroux is he has told Philadelphia which two teams that he'd be willing to accept a trade to. Those are Colorado and Florida. While making it known that Florida is his preferred destination, and Philly trying to do right by one of their all-time greats in franchise history is trying to hammer out a deal with Florida. The complication being that the Avs right now allegedly have the better offer, the more appealing offer to the Flyers. So they're working through that process. They've got a couple of days to do it. Giroux won't play before the deadline. So there's no threat of, well, we'll just keep him.
Right.
He's not traveled with the team. He's just hanging out in Philadelphia really just waiting for the official confirmation that it's Florida. I think the Avs are probably just being used as leverage at this point, and in order to get the Panthers to up their offer, and I think the Panthers don't have to blink.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. It's interesting because, like you said, so Claude Giroux has a full no move clause, meaning he can't be traded anywhere. He doesn't have a list of teams that he'll accept a move to. He, at the end of the day, can choose to waive or veto. So I think it's one of those things where, they're trying to do right by him. You and I were talking before. I think if the offers are far apart, in the same way, I don't think Claude Giroux is going to completely burn Philly. If it's like, well, we can send you to Florida for a middle prospect and a second round pick, or we can get two pieces we like and a first from the Avs. Like, I think he'll do right by them. But if the offers are close, I'm with you. They're going to do right by Giroux. I'd be willing to bet Florida's keeping that offer pretty low. But if they need to, they'll bump up a pick. They'll throw in an extra prospect or something like that to get it to what Philly considers close to get it done. I'm with you. I think the Avs are technically still in it, but it sounds like, this is probably shaping up a certain way. Uh-oh.
The Hagel return is multiple first-round picks.
Oh, okay. You made that look, and I was like, well, there we go. And we're having to jump off and do this. So, lots of movement in the NHL within the last 24 hours. Things have really started to pick up. This is, I think, the most I've seen players held out leading up to the deadline in a few years.
It's a good change. We've seen this has happened in the NBA and MLB for a long time, and I think it's a quality change.
Yeah, no, it's good. It makes our jobs at least a little bit more interesting. Been a little on edge for the last few days, but all good things. AJ, let's start diving into this a little bit in terms of biggest trades in Denver sports history, and let's start obviously with the most recent one.
Tyson Jost for Nico Sturm.
That's the one.
It was an earth shaker, baby.
Fan favorite sent out of town.
Wow. I will say, from a fan perspective, people were rocked by that.
Yeah, not. And I mean, like, I get it. You and I both talked about it on the Avalanche show that you and I got to know Tyson Jost quite a bit over the years, and he's a phenomenal dude. Couldn't find a better guy. Bummed to see him go as the person, but I can't tell if you're frozen or if you're looking in shock at the Hagel trade. Ooh, I think you are frozen and gone. Oh man. So I think you guys are with just me right now. Yep. Yeah, this is great. Live shows are phenomenal. So we were just talking with AJ about some of the more recent trades here in Colorado history. You know what? Actually, I'm going to do, while we wait for AJ to get back on this, because it looks like he's reloading. He's getting rebooted right now. I'm going to go ahead and pay some bills. I'm going to pay some bills here. Oh, man. And I don't even have this pulled up as it's erroring out. This is the worst show of all time. Yeah, here's probably just dying laughing behind the scenes right now. He's back. The
internet just keeps cutting out up here.
Yeah, it doesn't say your internet, my microphones. Well, even though AJ's back, I am going to go ahead and show our good friends over at DraftKings some love. Since March Madness is going on, college basketball fans can join the action on the court during the biggest tournament of the year with DraftKings Sportsbook. Turn your team's victory into your own big win. New customers can bet just $5 on any team to win and get $200 in free bets if they do. Yep, it is that simple. If they win, you win. DraftKings Sportsbook customers also can also bet on college hoops with same game parlays, becoming a personal favorite on the DNVR Avalanche beat. Combine multiple bets from the same game for a bigger payout. The more legs you add, the more money you can win. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. Best of all, you can deposit and withdraw your cash whenever you want. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code DNVR. Bet just $5 on any college hoops team to win and get $200 in free bets if they do. If they win, you win with promo code DNVR this week at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. Colorado only. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. And of course, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700. I couldn't decide if you were frozen or just blown away by the Brandon Hagel deal.
It was actually my brain processing it in real time. The internet just reacted accordingly. It picked up off the energy I was giving off.
Yeah, I was like, damn, this must really be something. He's committing to this bit. Well, AJ, so I was just kind of starting to transition into we transitioned out of the part where I was like, well, me sitting here talking about this by myself would be ridiculous. Where, you know, there's been a lot of big trades. Again, look, we love our Rockies. We love the Nuggets. The Nuggets have a few that were big time trades that did have a large impact on the franchise, but ultimately never really amounted to much. Going through Rocky trade history the last couple days, all the big trades seem to be big names going out and not really a ton coming back in. So
yeah, I actually can't think of outside of their first like 2 years of existence. I can't really think of many trades that the Rockies made to bring somebody to Colorado.
Yeah, no, there's not. And so I feel bad, but we're probably not going to have a ton of Rockies content on here. Just because, yeah, you know, the Tulowitzki trade, obviously Nolan Arenado from just a season ago. Big trades, big time trades that made national headlines, but
yeah, well, and like the Walker trade to St.
Yep.
Louis is what allowed them to sign Dexter Fowler. Yeah, it's really like the Matt Holliday dealing, and that's only because it worked. That's
Right.
that's why we remember that deal, because they've traded big star for prospects before, but Matt
Right.
Holliday was the only, like, it brought back Cargo, brought back Houston Street, who obviously were good players.
Yeah. And you feel just a little bad that like the biggest one for the Rockies, like, yeah, it brought back some good players. And like some of these other deals, you're talking about first ballot Hall of Famer, multiple time champions.
Like Cargo's like one of the best Rockies ever. So
Right.
some, you know, it's and like he played a role in a successful time period for them. So that's nice for them. But I would say that's probably the only Rockies deal.
So there we go. Rockies portion of this podcast done. Let's move on. Let's talk about the Nuggets, because I want us to kind of build up to Avs and Broncos, because that is where the meat of all of these is going to come from. There's a couple that the Nuggets have had that, again, you wish that it amounted to more, and part of this core got them actually to the Western Conference Finals that were part of some of these big trades, starting with J.R. Smith. Back in 2006, J.R. Smith was acquired from the Chicago Bulls. Howard Isley and 2 second-round picks. This kind of started to kick off that core that eventually became Allen Iverson, Carmelo Anthony, J.R. Smith, that went to a Western Conference Final for the Nuggets. I remember J.R. Smith.
Iverson Nuggets did not go to the conference final. It was the Chauncey Billups Nuggets.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And Chauncey Billups is the guy that was involved in the AI deal.
Yep. That was messed up there. I remember J.R. Smith most recently for making the ridiculously boneheaded move with the Cleveland Cavaliers.
That gave us the LeBron meme.
Yeah, I was gonna say that turned into a great LeBron meme. Yeah. And so like I kind of remember him like, well, what a big dummy for doing that. But J.R. Smith was very good with the Nuggets.
Yeah, he was their all-time leader in 3-pointers made up until Will Barton broke it a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Played a key role on again that Nuggets team that really looked like they were going to do some great things before. Were they swept by the Lakers, or was it 4-1? They got a game out of that, didn't they?
In which year?
The year they went to the Western Conference Finals.
2009? No, that was 4-2. That was a 6-game
4-2,
series.
okay.
That was a close 6-game series, too.
But I mean,
nightmares about it sometimes. Still have nightmares about them not being able to inbound the ball properly.
Dude. Well, it was such a fun run that, again, you were looking at the team. It was J.R. Smith. It was Carmelo Anthony. When there was still a little bit of
hero Chauncey Billups, like
right.
the best basketball player to ever come out of Colorado, was leading the Nuggets with championship experience because he'd won a chip with Detroit at that point in his career.
Yep.
So I mean, it was a huge deal.
Yeah,
Getting Chauncey Billups and going on that run, it was a huge deal.
Well, so let's start getting to that, because after they acquired J.R. Smith, they did bring in Allen Iverson.
It was also a huge deal, just because like AI was like, look, it's not working with Philly. You got to get out of here. And like Denver being Denver in the NBA landscape, it's not ever been particularly relevant.
Yep.
It had never really been all that competitive. They couldn't get out of the first round. They were on and on and on and on and on, right? And then it was like, oh, it's Allen Iverson, like one of the best guards ever. And on paper, I mean, you're like think about in that era, it was just like, let's just dribble the ball into the, and run ISO after ISO after ISO. Just imagine how different it would have been in today's basketball era, where, in the pace and space era, where those two guys could have gotten to play together in Melo, at peak Melo, right, and Allen Iverson, even a later stage Allen Iverson in his career, Well, man, what could have been? Just
I do remember that trade for exactly what you're talking about right now, though. Was, they had drafted Carmelo Anthony, I believe 3rd overall, correct?
Yep.
3rd overall. They had a team that looked like they were starting to build. One of the things as a young kid, I remember they had recently gone through the rebrand to the powder blue, new look.
Yeah, Kiki Vandeweghe tried to make it as UCLA as he possibly could in honor of his alma mater. Yeah, I remember.
And then they brought in Allen Iverson, and I really do remember at the time, like, even kind of double taking, like, whoa, is that like the Allen Iverson? Is there a second Allen Iverson that I don't know that plays in the NBA? Because, I mean, bona fide superstar, to your point, in the back half of his career. But that was the biggest name I remember as a kid coming through the Nuggets system, coming into that organization and kind of being their first little bit of star power that they were able to bring in, not counting drafting Carmelo Anthony, because, you get high draft picks from being bad. But I remember that being a big deal in terms of like feeling a little bit legitimized as a city in terms of basketball. And then
it felt good. I mean, it felt exciting because it was like Melo hadn't done anything with the Nuggets, really. Like they hadn't gone anywhere and done anything.
Well, and he had the unfortunate, luck of he was going to be bumped up next to LeBron James because top 3 in the same draft pick, and
that draft class ended up crazy because Dwayne Wade was the next pick. Yep. Chris Bosh was in that draft. Like, it ended up being a crazy draft class, and of course, those 3 guys combined to be the Heatles down in Miami. Win a string of titles together, bitches.
Something like that. But then to the point that you made earlier that I misspoke on, Allen Iverson then a few years later flipped for hometown hero Chauncey Billups. And again, this was another one of those ones where, kind of like the Allen Iverson deal initially, big name. And it meant a little bit more. Homegrown kid, played at CU, had won a championship in the NBA.
Yep.
Returns to Denver, and again, really kind of put them as close to a title as they've ever been.
Yeah. That was it. I mean, that's as close as the Nuggets ever got to touching God.
Yeah.
And it was a ton of fun. And of course it was the Lakers in the way.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out what word to preface Lakers with, and I just decided that they're evil enough that they can stand on their own.
Yeah.
The Lakers were in the way, and it just worked out that way. That was the series where Kobe perfected the thing that he did, where he jutted his jaw out. And like it was.
Well, it was one of those years where, you talk about it all the time, and I know people have talked about it with Peyton Manning. I'm trying to think of some other examples. The Bulls in the NBA, where you have really good teams, and it's just unfortunate that Peyton Manning had to go through Tom Brady every year, not necessarily the years he was with the Broncos, but with the Colts, he's in the same division.
Well, they were in the same conference, and ultimately those roads led through each other. And
right,
to get out of the West in that area, you had to go through Kobe. And it's interesting because I don't even remember who they played in the first round that year, but they rolled through them, and then they beat Dirk's Mavs. And like with relative ease.
Yeah.
And then it was like, all right, now you have to like slay the giant here. Because that felt like the NBA finals that year.
Mm-hmm.
That felt like the finals. Whoever was coming out of the East just did not feel like they quite matched up. So that was look, it was a great time. It was having Chauncey, like the local kid, be partially responsible for the Nuggets' greatest success was a wonderful story, and it's just too bad they couldn't quite close.
Yeah. So that's kind of...
Thanks for nothing, Trevor Ariza.
That's kind of the Nuggets' big trade history, right? Obviously, they've made a ton of trades.
Yeah, I mean, then they moved Melo to the Knicks. And then built the foundation of that, the George Karl team that he won Coach of the Year. Masai won Executive of the Year, and then the Nuggets didn't bring any of them back the year after that, and they totally bottomed out and walked into the Brian Shaw era. That was a big deal. When they traded for Marcus Camby, they traded Antonio McDyess for Marcus Camby. That was a big deal. They traded all those first-round picks to get Kenyon Martin. That was a big deal because that was like their big power move when they went all in. They also it's weird that multiple of these deals with the Knicks, but when they had when they picked Nene and Skidishvili in the top 10 together. Like, think about how different that goes if those guys both turned into... Nene was great. Like, I can't say Nene didn't live up to his potential. I thought he was great, but just too soft, too nice of a guy. Obviously, Skeeto was a total disaster. But like, what could have been, right? Because they had done such a good job acquiring assets and putting themselves in a position to be successful. The Nuggets had a solid trade history. I would say one of their sneakier, obviously the Aaron Gordon deal recently was a big deal because they kind of beat out other teams for that like final piece, if you will. But one of their, look, we mentioned him breaking their 3-point record, Will Barton. Like, that was, Will Barton was not Will Barton when they went and got him.
Right.
I would say that was one of their better under the radar moves. Was targeting Will Barton and helping him develop into the player that he has been in Denver for his career. He's been an important player for them. I know he's a polarizing figure amongst Nuggets fans, but as somebody who's not involved in the day in and day out of the Nuggets, but does regularly watch their games, it's been great to see the Nuggets help develop a guy like Barton.
Yeah. And you mentioned
they got a legit starting caliber player,
right,
out of that deal.
You mentioned Aaron Gordon, and I thought about including him, in this overarching conversation in terms of the deal to bring him in, because that was we talk about the deal. Important deal, and it's a big name player, bringing him into Denver to try to be part of that last piece. I didn't include him just because the Nuggets, again, and maybe this changes a lot over the next 2 months, just haven't done much with him here yet. Obviously, there's been a lot of injuries this year that have led to that, as we might be losing AJ again. But that's why I didn't have Aaron Gordon on my list. But I think it's a great point that, again, that's an important deal for the Nuggets. Bringing someone in, again, it's just, we can lose sight of it sometimes with the Broncos and even the Avs a little bit. In the NBA, it's a big deal to bring in big name players to a market like this. I'm going to remind you guys about our good partners over at Evoca TV. Look, if you haven't been able to watch the Nuggets or Avalanche games, Evoca TV is a totally new TV delivery service that is less expensive, more efficient, and offers a superior picture than legacy providers. Service includes local networks like Altitude Sports and other national channels. Evoca TV is growing constantly and adding new channels to their lineup. The service is now available in Denver, Colorado Springs, Phoenix, Boise, and Twin Falls, Idaho. Most importantly, Evoca TV has Altitude Sports. Let me repeat that. Evoca TV has Altitude Sports, making it easy to follow the Colorado sports teams you love, including the Nuggets, Avalanche, Rapids, and Mammoth. Plus, you'll have access to coverage of the Rams, Pioneers, and baseball too, with the addition of AT&T Sportsnet Rocky Mountain, which is coming soon. Go to evoca.tv/DNVR. That's Evoca, EVOCA.TV/DNVR. Only $25 per month plus the receiver. No contracts, no hidden fees, and that price is locked in for 2 years. The DNVR Sports Podcast brought to you by Breckenridge Brewery, Jesse Montano, AJ Hayfley, talking biggest trades in Denver sports history. And thankfully, we haven't had to bail out yet to talk about a current trade.
I think we're good. With
the Colorado Avalanche. I do too. I think we'll make it through. So yeah, AJ, I think, the Nuggets, a lot of those deals would have been much higher. Not that we're really putting together a list here, but they would have been much higher in the list had one of those teams turned into a championship team. They didn't.
Yeah, and I think like you could put some of those moves into the same category that you would put like the Avs trading for like Theo Fleury.
Right.
Where a big one, a big deadline deal, a big important trade. But it just does not end in the chip that you want.
Right.
But the player is great for you, and everything worked except for did not win the cup.
Right. Well, let's move on to a couple teams here that have made trades that have directly led to championships. I'm going to start with the Nuggets, the Broncos, just because they have made the biggest, most recent splash in Denver sports.
Yeah, I mean, the Russell Wilson trade is enormous.
Huge.
It is landscape shifting. If Russell Wilson just continues to be Russell Wilson. Like, I know that he's coming off of a down year and for the first time ever had injury issues. But if you take that, if you take away the injuries and the games in which he played through injury, like Russell Wilson is still sick, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He's still a top 10 quarterback, and where he is in that hierarchy probably depends on how we really feel about the trade. But I mean, that if you told me that drafting Drew Lock would eventually end in him being built for Russell Wilson, I probably wouldn't have been as disappointed as I was when Drew Lock was drafted.
Yeah.
Because,
do you think, just real quick, do you think Russell Wilson can play for 10 to 12 more years?
I don't know about that, especially at his size with the way that he runs around and the mobility and all that. He has to stop getting hit as much as he has, which was part of his problem with this in Seattle, was that he was just getting hit too much. Despite crazy escapability, somehow the guy was still getting hit all the time. And it's like, how do you build an offensive line this bad? But whatever.
Well, at least that's not an issue for the Broncos.
I don't think. But I would be surprised by 10 years. My goal is let's get to 6. Let's see. If they can get 6 quality years out of Russell Wilson, if they can get 6 years of top 10 play, that should put them in contention. That puts you, if you have a top 10 quarterback, you should be competing for a Super Bowl, flat out. If you have a top 10 quarterback playing like a top 10 quarterback, you should be competing for a Super Bowl. So if they can get those 6 years, that would be great. I mean, let's be real. After the last 6 years, I would take 4 years.
Right. So Russell Wilson is
super picky here about how long Russell Wilson can play, but part of the appeal of the deal is that he is arriving to Denver 2 years younger than Peyton Manning was when Peyton Manning got here. And if we can get, I just added those 2 years to Peyton's tenure. It's really all I did. Let's get to 6.
Yeah. Russell Wilson is 33. He'll be 34 this season in November. So 6 years puts him right on the doorstep of 40. And to your point, it's not exclusive just to football. Players that rely heavily on their mobility and their legs and their athleticism as a huge part of their game, typically that decline is a little bit steeper. And like I said, that's not exclusive to football or quarterbacks. You and I talk about it all the time relative to hockey and hockey players. When that's your main tool, it's a little bit harder to extend that career really far beyond 10 to 12 years puts him near 45, which I don't know. It's a huge deal, but as of right now today, still far from being the Broncos' biggest deal, correct?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't know. We don't know how it turns out, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying. As of today, as of March 18th, 2022. That's a hilarious comment that just came through. Yeah. Russell Wilson still probably isn't. Maybe if you're talking trades, maybe he's worked his way into the top 3. But there's a couple big deals that the Broncos have made. First and foremost, guy named John Elway. Now, this deal
we have to limit Elway to just his on-field impact. Otherwise,
100%.
Otherwise, you're talking about maybe the most impactful trade in sports history because of the impact that Elway had on Denver as a sports city, as a part of the landscape, and then turning around and becoming the general manager and winning a Super Bowl as the GM. And I know that everybody was like, oh, when John Elway stepped down, they were like, it was like a parade in town. It was like they won their 4th Super Bowl. But like that dude like built a legit Super Bowl team. The fact that it's held against him that he only did it once is wild to me and says a lot about what Joe Sakic has in his future if things don't go particularly well in Ball Arena. But we have to limit this to just the on-field impact.
Yeah,
because the Elway trade was so sprawling and so impactful on the rest of the sports scene in Denver that it's too much. Like it's overwhelming. So, and even as just on field, come on,
right?
For my money, still a top 5 quarterback. Even with all the great ones that with the Mannings and Brady's and Rodgers and Breeze and all these guys from this last generation that were unbelievable. John Elway, like people will go and look at Elway's numbers and be like, what's impressive about this? And it's like, okay.
Right.
Like, I see you either didn't live through that era or you have forgotten what football was like back then.
Right.
And how bad some of those Broncos teams were that he just put on his back and just carried to relevance over and over and over and over. He was on. John Elway was Superman.
It's you hear about some of these guys, and there's going to be another guy that we'll get to, and we're talking about the Avs in the ultra competitive, changed the way that teams looked at stuff. But John Elway was absolutely that person. We've heard about it, and that's even part of some of the criticism that was leveraged against him as a GM is that he is so prideful. He is ultra competitive, and again, taking it back, not ignoring the GM side of it, that shapes a locker room. That shapes an organization.
Well,
And
it sets a tone. It
Right.
sets a tone for the attitude of your organization. How your best player comports himself is an enormous part of how your culture develops in an organization.
Yeah, and he did that for years, and now it's funny because before they were the Avalanche, the Quebec Nordiques dealt with actually a similar situation on the other side of it, where John Elway had been drafted. He didn't want to go the Baltimore Colts. They were in Baltimore at the time.
Yeah, he didn't want to play for Frank Kush.
Yep. Didn't want to play there. There was a bit of a standstill. Eventually traded to the Denver Broncos. So, I mean, they got him as a, technically as a rookie. Uh-oh.
Go on.
Okay. No, I'm sorry. I'm so on edge these days that anytime you make a face, I'm like, and we're having to get off of this.
No. Sturm is going to play in the middle of New Hook and Conver. See, that's why I made that face.
So, they got him young, but now I'm not old enough to remember when John Elway first came to the Broncos.
I was not born.
Yeah. But from everything that I've gathered, people, we know some pretty smart Bronco people. It changed the face of that franchise and really has kind of changed it in a way that has bled through to now. And it's part of the reason why there is this, in my opinion, a little weird, mindset of the Broncos aren't allowed to lose. Like, they're not allowed to be bad.
Well, it was really up until this most recent run. It was because they didn't.
Yeah.
They had 2 losing seasons in like 30 years. Like, they just didn't put losing seasons on the board. And when they did, it was a one-off. They had their share, especially at the second half of the Mike Shanahan era, but they had their share of 8-8s.
Right.
But an 8-8 season was far from a losing season. 8-8 was considered a failure in Denver.
Right.
And that's just how expectations were. And that's because Elway raised them that high.
So dramatically. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when he left, you remember when he left, they were coming off of, they were coming off a run where they went 12-4, 13-3.
Yeah.
I think, like they were just that good.
Back-to-back Super Bowls.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's hard to say because sometimes can be forgotten. Peyton Manning was a free agent pickup.
Yeah.
Technically wasn't a trade. And look, I told you again, doing some of this research, there were trades that the Broncos made that the players became such staples and such fabric of who the Broncos were, and for a while who the sports scene was, that you forget that they weren't homegrown Broncos. Champ Bailey, I guess technically they did draft Terrell Davis, but that was they traded for that pick with the Minnesota Vikings. The Broncos have made some really big, impactful trades over the years, and you forget that because those players integrated and became such a big part of the teams that they were on, but also the organization. Like Champ Bailey, yeah, I remember him being traded away at the end, but like to me, Champ Bailey is like a lifelong Bronco. I forgot that he was traded.
Really, really weird to think of Champ Bailey as a New Orleans Saint at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, even if it was just 1 year that he was there, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But sure enough, yeah, Champ Bailey brought in. But I think it's
Champ
hard
Bailey had maybe the single greatest season that a modern cornerback has ever had, where he had 10 interceptions and allowed, I think, 14 completed passes all season, and that was the year that he had the pick of Brady in the playoffs that he ran back 100 yards and absolutely fumbled at the 1 yard line when Ben Watson ran him down. And they called it out of bounds because they didn't have a definitive look. But yeah, that was, the Champ Bailey and Clinton Portis was on his way to being an all-time great. Like he was like the successor to Terrell Davis.
Yeah.
he was on his way to being like, yeah, we're going to rewrite these books. And then they went and got Champ Bailey and Tatum Bell, who ended up selling cell phones at the Aurora Mall. So,
woof.
Yeah, things went well there. But, I mean, Champ Bailey was a first ballot Hall of Famer for a reason. Yeah. You know, he was a no-brainer. Like, he's the gold standard of cornerbacks in the last 20 years. You know, you look at greatest cornerbacks of all time, and you have guys like Deion Sanders and Darryl Green and Champ Bailey's in that top 5.
For sure.
Easily.
For sure. And yeah, so like I said, it's and even John Elway, and again, I know there's a bit of an asterisk on John Elway because he didn't technically play anywhere else. But that was someone they had to give up assets to bring in.
Yeah, it was a trade. It was a trade. They didn't draft him. They traded for him.
Right. But again, like those are two major influential players. And then again, once you talk about John Elway, there's a much larger impact. So it's hard to argue that those, especially the John Elway one, that isn't the biggest trade in Denver sports history. But the Avs have a couple on their resume as well that definitely give it a run, give him the run for some money.
They have 4 trades that the Avalanche have made in their history that I think stand out as legit, holy shit level trades.
Yeah. I'm going to lead up to the net because I think that's probably the biggest one. I'm going to start with one that when you were talking about the Nuggets and some of the trades that they made, how they just never worked. This one came to my mind, even though it ultimately ended up working in the past. But I think, again, sometimes people forget that the first run at it technically didn't work out. Not technically, it didn't work out. Ray Bourque. Ray Bourque was acquired from the Boston Bruins at the trade deadline in the 99-2000 season. He was on the team that lost, one of the teams that lost to the Dallas Stars in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals the year before the Avs went on to win the Cup.
How fun that there were multiple of those teams.
Yeah, geez, dude. I remember crying.
Yeah, my family was on vacation in Hawaii for both of those.
Really?
Yep. We went back-to-back years, and I watched them lose those games in a restaurant in Hawaii at like 3:00 in the afternoon because of the time difference.
Yeah.
And it was just horrible, man. It was horrible.
Yeah. I watched the second one, the 2000, at the like official watch party at Pepsi Center on like the big board, which like looking back on it now, I'm like, this is probably like 10 megapixels. I can't even imagine what that looked like. But that was a trade that in its first year, looking at that to kind of be the final piece, didn't work out, didn't get him over the hump. Now, obviously, he becomes kind of the center of everything on the next Cup run when they do eventually go on to beat the New Jersey Devils in 7 games in 2001 to get Ray Bourque his first Cup in a 22-year career. But that Ray Bourque trade needed some pieces before it got over the hump.
Yeah, I mean, obviously needed Rob Blake.
And that's the next one.
To build the Rob Blake, Ray Bourque, Adam Foote defensive doom.
Right.
Like, just unreal.
Is the Ray Bourque one another one of your, the Rob Blake one another one of your trades that's the holy shit caliber?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was Rob Blake. Like, Ray Bourque, you knew, was at the end of his career. He was still a really, really good player.
Yeah.
At the end of his career. But if you actually go back and rewatch that Cup final, you'll see Ray Bourque actually got eaten up in that series a bit. He was just spent. You could tell he was completely exhausted. He was totally done for by the end of that. But do you know who wasn't totally done for? Was Rob Blake, who was so sick.
Yeah.
In that final series. And
that whole playoff run.
That was a tough trade because Adam Deadmarsh was a fan favorite.
Team favorite.
Yeah, I mean he was best friends with Peter Forsberg. He's like the only guy Peter Forsberg actually ever liked.
Yeah. And I mean, you bring in a guy who I remember Peter McNabb describing him as the Jaromir Jagr of defensemen. And I mean, this is when Jagr was in his prime at his peak.
Not 45-year-old Jagr that's somehow still putting up 40-point season in the NHL.
Right.
But like the Jaromir Jagr that was like decimating the league.
Right. Yeah. Just, I mean, like it was just a joke every time he jumped on the ice. No one could contain him. And I mean, Rob Blake was really one of the first defensemen that I can remember, especially here in Colorado, that was like, he was almost kind of like Adam Foote and Ray Bourque mixed. He had the mean, nasty.
So physical. He had that hip check that was just devastating. And then he also scored 15 goals a year. Like, if it were not for Chris Pronger, he would have been the prototypical two-way defenseman that everybody wanted to get. But Chris Pronger existed. So Rob Blake was just the other guy who was unbelievable.
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, those are two trades that tied everything together in 2001. Now, obviously, we're leading up to Patrick Waugh here, but I do want to make note that the Avs are probably the only team, at least I can think of in Denver, who had a trade that was about moving a player out that has ended up being a huge net positive. And that's obviously the Matt Duchene deal. Maybe like the biggest blockbuster in season in Denver sports history.
Yeah, I would say that and the Melo deal. Those are the two ones where Melo got traded to the Knicks. Because, you know, they cleaned out the Knicks franchise. They got all of the good players from the Knicks. So that's the only other in season, and like it was about because Melo didn't want to be there anymore. He wanted to be in New York because his wife wanted to be in New York, and he absolutely hated Denver. And so like those are the two deals where it was like those dudes didn't want to be in town anymore, and so they got traded out, and both franchises made hay. I mean, the Nuggets did a great job, and then the Avs, obviously, you know, you look at how many of the pieces from that deal haven't worked out. You know, Shane Bowers hasn't played an NHL game. Matt Steinberg still just a prospect. Some of the other pieces, you know, Andrew Hammond was obviously gone immediately.
But there was even a feel-good story there.
Yeah, there was the brief glimpse of happiness there.
Right.
But I mean, if all they got out of that deal was Sam Girard and Bowen Byram, oh no, not that.
I was going to say,
that's half of their top four. If they both get healthy, that's half of their top four this year, and probably for the next half decade.
Right. And I mean, there's a lot of people who, again, I know he's kind of had a down year, and now maybe you look at it, maybe some of the injury, but as recently as training camp this year, I think kind of the consensus was, and not even just amongst Avs fans, I wouldn't trade Sam Girard for Matt Duchene 1-for-1.
No, right now, I mean, all things considered, even with the season that Duchene has had and with the down year that Girard has had, I would still say no. Moving forward, I mean, Sam Girard is just such an important part of the defense, and he's still so young, and his contract is so good that you just have to value that guy.
Yeah.
And so he's just so important. And then obviously, look, but history could have been way different, man. Had they gotten Jack Hughes, history could have gone way different. History could have been way different had they gotten Capo Caco. You know, and hey, they wanted Kirby Dach something fierce. And when Chicago took him, and Kirby Dach has been a letdown in the NHL so far. Obviously, it's very early in his career, but he hasn't taken the steps forward yet to make you think that would have been okay.
Yeah.
You know, but they could have ended up with Jack Hughes. They could have had a 1-2 punch of Nathan McKinnon and Jack Hughes for a decade. And that might have been but that changes all of Avalanche history. The Nazem Kadri trade doesn't happen. And so where does Tyson Barrie get moved to? What's the package there? So there's so many what ifs if the Avs get any lotto luck whatsoever and they get the first overall pick and they end up with Jack Hughes that year. And instead they get Bowen Byram. Ed, Bowen Byram is great. Right. I think he's going to be a star. I wouldn't trade him under pretty much any I wouldn't trade him unless one of the 2 or 3 best players in the NHL was on the table. And that's
again, go back to the Duchene thing. I don't think no one would trade Byram for Duchene 1-for-1. No
Absolutely.
One. No
and
one.
If you tried to sell Byram and Girard separately, you'd get a pretty penny for both.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking. I mean, I just think that it's that's the future of their that's the foundation of the defense that for Colorado is. You know, they had Cale Makar, Sam Girard, Bowen Byram long term. Those 3 guys, and 2 of them came from the Duchene deal.
Right, and all you gave up was Matt Duchene.
Yeah, and if anything else pans out, if Matt Steinberg's amazing season at Cornell puts him on a path towards being an NHL player, that's a huge win for you.
Right.
And that deal just gives you one more guy. So,
or even, and I know Shane Bowers doesn't, and we're kind of getting sidetracked here, but I know Shane Bowers doesn't have a ton of value. But, you package any of those guys in a deal that brings someone else in that just kind of adds to it.
If you build on that trade train, you get somebody that helps you out down the line, worth.
Yeah, and it's funny because the franchise has actually had a couple of those deals. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. There was obviously the Eric Lindros situation when the franchise was still in Quebec. Kind of the reverse roles of John Elway.
Not counting it because it happened in Quebec and
So that is a trade
that
set up a lot for the Avs, brought in guys like Peter Forsberg. But after the team had moved to Denver, they brought what was really considered a pretty elite team from Quebec to Colorado in a relocation, as it just wasn't really a viable market anymore in Quebec. And a lot of people felt like, wow, this is a great team, but maybe they are a goaltender away. Then Patrick Waugh gets left in net for 9 goals against as a Montreal Canadian, and on his way off the ice against the Detroit Red Wings, on his way off the ice, tells then, I believe it was the Montreal owner, correct?
Who was sitting behind the bench.
Who was sitting behind the bench. There didn't used to be glass behind the bench. That he was done. He had played his last game for Montreal, and it was just, I believe, about 48 hours later. Blockbuster trade brings Patrick Waugh to Colorado. He would then go on to win the Stanley Cup later that same season, and then add a second Stanley Cup and playoff MVP in 2001. AJ, I think this is one that gives John Elway's a run for his money
for the
trade on ice.
Absolutely pushes the Elway deal because Patrick Waugh is the best goaltender of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I mean, without him, there's a great chance this organization is one of those. They've been around for 25 years and they don't have anything to show for it.
Yeah. Because Jocelyn Thibault was looked at as one of the up-and-coming top goaltending prospects in the NHL. And if they don't go and get Patrick Waugh, we don't know what would have happened. We don't know what that world looks like. But Stephane Fiset and Jocelyn Thibault were the 2 guys in Colorado's net that year. And look, it's funny because they've used 1 first-round pick in their history on a goaltender. And it was their first ever pick before the Avalanche even had a name. So Mark Denis didn't actually have a jersey to hold up. It was just the NHL logo.
The NHL one, yeah.
And ended up having a nice, long NHL career. It might have been, Mark Denis might have been that guy. That they would not be if Patrick Waugh was not in Colorado. Maybe Mark Denis is the best Avalanche goaltender ever sitting here today. Right. But Patrick Waugh did happen. And he shattered all of the goaltending records that existed at the time, some of which got broken later on by Marty Brodeur. But Patrick Waugh ended up backstopping 2 Stanley Cup teams, and is the only player in NHL history to win 3 Conn Smythe trophies.
Yeah, across 3 different decades. That's always my favorite little tidbit about that. 80s, 90s, and 2000s. He won 3 different playoff MVPs.
Yeah. So the people in here the people in our chat that are like easily the best trade ever is John Elway. Look, it's an enormous. If we stick to just on-field impact, I think Patrick Waugh has an argument.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
If you get beyond that into the cultural aspect of things, it's no doubt John Elway.
Yeah.
But just for what they did as players.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, there was someone in the chat way earlier that had said Patrick Waugh came in and won 2 championships within 5 years. It took John Elway 20 years to get there.
Well, and it took John Elway having an MVP running back.
Right.
A running back that ended up in the Hall of Fame because of his play during that era, during that run, especially that 2 Super Bowl run. And because Elway was at the end of the career there, like he was okay. Go back and watch the Super Bowl win against the Packers. John Elway wasn't great. he wasn't awesome. His most impactful play in that game was him running on 3rd and 7.
And you know, right. Yeah, and I mean it's a great play. Everyone remembers it, but
helicopter, of course.
Yeah. But you know, I think about because so many people talk about the 2001 Avs team and there were so many great players, but they were on the verge of losing that cup final, and Patrick Waugh actually both of their cup finals, Patrick Waugh just decided like, yeah, no, I'm done giving up goals. I'm done losing, doing any of that stuff. There's the great story that
no more rats.
No more rats. I was just about to say, there's a great story. He gave up 1 goal in Florida. The team was up 2-0 in the series. He gave up 1 goal. During the next TV timeout, he went to the bench and said, no more rats. And he didn't give up a goal for the rest of the series. I mean, you know, I don't know of any other player across any sport who had the ability to just decide when to flip that switch to that level like Patrick Waugh had.
Patrick Waugh, and you saw him do it. He had more games played and more wins just in the Stanley Cup playoffs than a lot of goaltenders end up with in their careers.
Yeah.
He had 151 wins in the postseason.
It's crazy.
Like, yeah, and in Colorado, he was unbelievable. His worst postseason as a member of the Avalanche was he had a 906 save percentage. So
in the late 90s, early 2000s too.
Yeah, when guys were not putting up 920s. And he was. He finished his postseason career as a 918 goaltender with a 2.3 goals against average and 23 shutouts.
It was game 6 of the 2001 finals is one of the ones to me that has always stuck out as like, it was on another level.
Yeah. Well,
you could tell 5 minutes in, he wasn't going to give one up.
It was the defending champs, the New Jersey Devils, trying to close out the series at home with Martin Brodeur, the other guy that everybody talked about as the greatest goalie ever, 1-on-1, head-to-head. And the Devils outplayed the Avs like crazy. They did everything they could to end that game, and Patrick Waugh just said no.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of people that thought that Patrick Waugh's play had been kind of on like a downward trend that series, and then he lets in 1 goal across games 6 and 7 when the stakes are at their highest. Out of control. And so I really do. I think it comes down to John Elway and Patrick Waugh as in terms of the biggest trades that have ever been made in Colorado sports history. Obviously, if Russell Wilson goes on to have a huge impact and bring championships here. He enters into that conversation. Again, there's a lot of there's a conversation to be had about that Eric Lindros deal that set up so many things for the Colorado Avalanche. And obviously the Avs are a cup favorite. They've got 3 days this year to maybe make a deal that also puts its name into this kind of category if they get over the hump. But basically, AJ, what I've taken away from this is Denver sports fans are very lucky.
Oh, dude, Denver sports fans have had it good. Pretty much since the Avalanche got to town.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Rockies showed up, and the Rockies made the playoffs faster than any expansion team ever up until that point. Then the Avs showed up and won a cup in their first year. All the while, the Nuggets existed. They were fun during the 80s, and the 90s we just won't talk about.
Yeah.
And then they were fun again during the 2000s, and then there was a brief down period, and now you have 3 legitimate championship contenders between the Broncos, the Nuggets, and the Avs. And we're talking the Avs just won the President's Trophy last season. They lead the NHL today. They lead the NHL.
Right.
So they could win another President's Trophy. And we'll see, man. It's a wonderful time for Denver sports. It's a wonderful time. And the Russell Wilson deal really brings back the Broncos from the dead. Because in this version of the NFL, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance.
Yeah. Well, and it was just, and again, I feel bad for our Rockies folks, but our DNVR Sports Twitter account the other day had tweeted out, there's a picture of Nikola Jokic, homegrown draft pick. Nathan McKinnon, homegrown draft pick. Cale Makar, homegrown draft pick. Superstars. All 3 of those guys, superstars. And now, via trade, you add a guy like Russell Wilson just to that sports scene. I know we've had the talk on this show before about who the face of Denver sports is. And I think that's an interesting question because it's like, okay, well, are you talking about who the best player is, who is the most famous player, who, whatever. But either way, you now have 4 players across 3 different teams that are truly in an elite tier at bare minimum, however you want to divide up the conversation. I don't think there's any of them that are outside of the top 10 at their position.
Mm-hmm.
I think for most of those guys, there's a solid argument for them all being in the top 5 at their position.
Well, and the Avs alone have 2 of the top 10 defensemen in the NHL. They have a top 5 center and 2 of the top 10 left and right wings in the NHL.
Right.
Like the Avs alone are unbelievably
loaded.
Stacked.
Yeah, and it's part of the reason why make sure you guys go get Evoca TV so that you can see this stuff, because it has been one of the things that has frustrated me most. Thankfully, I've been able to catch every game this year. Come on down to the DNVR bar. We have every Avs and Nuggets game on. But just if you are a casual fan of the Avalanche, if you're a big Nuggets fan, Broncos fan, Rockies fan, please try to get in front of a TV and watch what the product that this team has to put on the ice right now, because even in terms of like Denver sports teams, this roster, again, you got to put it all together, but is maybe one of the best that we've ever seen in terms of pure talent at every position. It's wild. And
it's very impressive.
It's great that as a city, we got to add Russell Wilson to that list of superstars. And
it wasn't a trade, but none of you assholes are going to stop me from being excited about Chris Bryant.
Yeah. I was actually bummed because here's celebrating behind the scenes. I was bummed because I was like, oh damn, we can use him free agent signing. But maybe we'll do a show on signings and just players that have come to Denver in general. AJ, I'm glad we made it through this without having to bail on it and go do a different show. But this does now mean that we'll probably get off this one and have to get on an emergency pod in like 20 minutes. So, there's that. AJ, thanks for doing this with me. Big shout out to Yahir, as always, making sure you guys can see and hear us, making us sound good. Big shout out to him. Thank you guys all for joining along. This is the Denver Sports Podcast brought to you by Breckenridge Brewery. For AJ Hafley, I'm Jesse Montano. We will talk to you guys next week.